Hi, I'm Alistair Shipley. Driven by the beliefs that everyone has something special to offer, I created Not So Average, the podcast that proves that you don't need to be in the top 1% to be truly extraordinary. Each episode spotlights everyday people from your community, the very individuals you might pass on the street. These relatable stories reveal that whether you're a jack of all trades or a niche specialist, we all have unique experiences and valuable lessons to share. Imagine if we all took a moment to realize we're all not so average. Let's get after it. Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of Not So Average, the show where we unpack the stories behind the people who took the road less traveled and found meaning along the way. If you've been enjoying these conversations, don't forget to follow, share, and leave a review. It helps us keep telling stories that matter. Today's guest is someone who didn't just launch a FinTech company, he reimagined what one could stand for. Nicolas Beique is the founder of Helcim, a Calgary-based company that's making waves across Canada for doing things the right way, even when it's harder. He started Helcim long before FinTech was cool, driven by a simple but powerful mission: empower small business to compete with giants. Since then, he built a team-first culture, turned down the easy path of fast capital, and pushed for bold ideas like Canada becoming a global tech powerhouse by 2050. I'm getting excited for this, so let's get after it. Welcome, Nick.
Thanks for having me. I'm super excited for this.
I was really excited when I got the message from your marketing team saying, hey, you want to have kind of a Canadian narrative and sit down with podcasts local here. And as soon as I saw that, I was on the tarmac flying to Las Vegas. Didn't wait a second. I was like, yes, done. Book it. Let's find the time. And here we are. So thank you again.
Yeah, no, thanks. And I think it's one of those things where we're in an interesting moment right now with what's happening in Canada, where everybody's waking up. And there's a ton of people that have already were already championing this country, that were already building big companies or on their path to doing so. So many entrepreneurs, including yourself, just like going at it. And so it's not like there was a lack of that, but I think there was a lack of awareness from the greater community of this is actually happening right here. Mm-hmm. Even like when you think about what's happening with the buy local and the buy Canadian, that's a wonderful thing. People are realizing, oh my God, this barbecue sauce is even better. And this beer is even, and I think it's unfortunate it took this moment for us to wake up, but it's happening now. So whether it's tech or it's Canada in general, like we are seeing what's happening in the world, including to our neighbors in the South, and going, we have actually a pretty amazing country here in terms of the freedoms that we enjoy, the quality of life that we enjoy, and just the natural resources and just like everything we're sitting on and going, wow, are we going to waste this away? Or are we going to turn into the superpower that we should be? And I think it's just waking up people both to champion that, but also to support it. It's actually like fun. I'm loving the energy that's happening right now.
Yeah, I was relating it back to a friend as like the stampede buzz, but in terms of a tech industry right now. So everybody's excited, that energy is there, and you can feel it.
And I think it's going to last. I really think there's some fears that, the buy Canadian's going to fizzle out. But I think, no, I think people are like, this was a shock to the system. And I think that sticks with you. And I'm glad.
Yeah, me too. So you started Helcim before FinTech was even a buzzword. What lit the spark for you to build something on your own?
Yeah, before even like tech, it's funny. If you think about the early 2000s, you graduate, you go to UFC, you graduate, you get a job in oil and gas. Yeah. And if you were doing anything but that, people looked at you like silly. Yeah. It wasn't like, it's not like
during the boom.
Yeah, exactly. So it wasn't like you're like, oh, cool, you're into tech. Be like, that wasn't even a word. It was just like, yeah, I'm going to do like a technology or an IT company. And people like, okay, cool, have fun with that kind of thing. It was almost like the rejects, right? And there wasn't a community to really chat with, right? So it was very like underground, very hacky. For me, to go back to your question, so I've been coding since I was 12, always started businesses, like I've been starting businesses since I was a kid.
I'm assuming not the lemonade stand.
No, not but it was like I started, but there's a list of businesses from like social media websites before that was a word and before kind of the Facebook days. I did a lot of animation in 3D. So I had this like 3D tool that lets you like modify a car. This is like the Fast and Furious days. So you can
Whoa.
modify the car and buy the parts. That didn't work. But the main thing I did was build websites. So this is like early 2000s. Everybody's needing a website. I'm like 15, 16 years old. And I'm building websites for people. I'm coding them. I'm designing them. And what I started doing is I started going on my neighborhood and strip malls and going, I'm going to go to the businesses I know and just ask them if they need a site. One of the first person that said yes was my barber, Jean. And
Shout out to Barbara Jean.
Shout out to Barbara Jean. And I said, I'm trying to start this business and do this, and I'm pretty good at it. And at least I thought I was. And he just said yes and wrote me a $500 check on the spot. And that moment is crystallized in my mind because not only did it like show to me, oh, this could be like, I could be a business person, right? But I think it's where I ultimately fell in love with small business owners because they are such risk takers and they are I think that's been hijacked by like the startup founder is the true entrepreneur, the true adventurer. But I think every small business owner, even if they're like a barber or a dentist, whatever, is taking huge risks and taking a lot of risks on people in their community to help them build that business. So became like fell in love with small business owners. And I was so like proud and I wanted to do a good job. But that was like the catalyst. And then that turned into, there's a local chain of computer stores here. I don't know if you Memory Express.
Oh, yeah.
So I was like 16, walked into stores, said, your website sucks. They had a static site, no like configurator, nothing. And instead of giving me a contract, they're like, we'll hire you at $8 an hour if you want. So I ended up showing up every afternoon. The first day was fun because they let me build a computer. So they're like, go build your own computer so you can work. So I'm like taking all the parts from the shelf and building a computer. And then me and a guy there ended up coding their first true e-commerce website. And that's how we started the first configurator, checkout. So back in the days before Shopify, like you're coding everything from scratch. And that was like one of those founding moments that kind of led me down the path of, ironically, started in e-commerce, and ironically got into payments because saw that as one of the biggest
linking factors.
Exactly, one of the missing things that we could do better at.
Wow, that's crazy. So did you grow up around entrepreneurship or was this something that you carved out for yourself?
So there wasn't much in my family except for my cousin. So I grew up in Montreal. Calgary became home when I was in my teens. But I grew up in Montreal. Parents had normal jobs. But my cousin, my older cousin I looked up to, was very entrepreneurial. And I think that was like me the first time learning that those words existed and you could do this. And he was very much into computers and I was into computers. So I think that's part of where the spark came from.
Oh, that's awesome. Did you ever do any work with your cousin?
We did a little bit.
Okay.
But then ultimately, like with the distance and everything, I just ended up going around businesses and strip malls in Calgary and trying to get some business.
I have real respect for anybody that goes door to door for anything. That's my background too. Shout out to anybody that starts their business doing it that way. Who were your mentors or like figures that helped shape your early path when you got started?
That's a good question. I think that I've been lucky that there's been people here and there that I think have been champions. I don't know if I would call them mentors, but they'd be champions. Down the road, when we started going down the payments journey, first I became a reseller of payments.
Okay.
So I was building these commerce website, plugging in payments. There was like Moneris and PayPal, and they weren't both great solution. So we said maybe we could do something better, right? But I'm like, at that point, I'm like in my early 20s.
Okay.
And I've got a shaved head and I look like a punk and I'm calling up Canadian banks and saying, hey, I want to be able to like offer payment services. And like people are hanging up. Like it's just, there's no interest in doing business with, and the Canadian banks to this day are pretty closed off.
Yeah.
But ultimately we found a partner out in the US, like a bank that said, yeah, we have this like reseller program. It's a bit white label. So if you go door to door and you sell either like online payments or even like the machines, you can reseller. And that's how I started my first payments business. It was really like we would build our own technology and build custom e-commerce and build all this stuff. But ultimately we were just like a door-to-door reseller of these services. And back to your question about mentors, I was lucky that along the way, even at those banks, there's usually one or two people that stood out and they must have seen like a drive or a spark or something, and they became the champion at the bank.
Oh, sweet.
And I built those relationships for a very long time. And ultimately that's what led to launching the Helcim you see today, which was launched in 2020, like the kind of 2.0, where we became our own processor. I had built these relationships with the bank for over 10 years and finally convinced them after many years to let us be kind of like our own bank. And
did you always have that idea or was this something more recent and because you already had the relationships, it was easier to get it through?
No, what was happening in the payments industry was interesting because you had the big banks. I mentioned Moneris and kind of others, right? And they're like the kind of legacy. They controlled most of the market, but they weren't very modern. And then you had resellers. So you put your own twist on it to build some of your technology, but you're still in the shadow of the bank, and it wasn't these super great experiences. But then you were seeing what was happening in Silicon Valley. And like you got Square showed up, Stripe showed up, both around like 2011 or so. And they were breaking all the rules. So like Visa, MasterCard had very clear rules that like you can't do what they did, which is essentially like aggregating all payments, like they're just cowboying it. And so Visa, but they had a lot of success, they had a lot of growth. So Visa, MasterCard got together and said, we need to make this legal because we either shut it down or we make it legal. And they're going to choose the capitalist thing and make it legal. So in 2015, they came out with a framework called payment facilitation. Without boring you to death.
Is that why there was just a huge spike in, what was it, Toast, Clover, like all these new POS systems started coming out?
Yeah. So essentially what they did is they put a structure together saying a technology company, like a non-bank, can essentially become a bank. So underwrite small businesses, approve them, push out money to them, do all the work that a bank does, as long as they have this kind of almost like invisible partner in the background that is like the checks and balances in case something goes wrong, right? So they reverse engineered it to make it allowed. So then you're saying, okay, this is coming out. It's 2015, 16, right? And everybody wants to, like everybody that's in the payment space that was stuck being a reseller is going, I want to do this, right? But the banks are like, no, thank you. Like, why are we going to create competitors? Why are we going to create these challengers? Ultimately, it was actually one of our bank partners where for years, I was just hitting my head against the wall going, I want to do this. I want to do this. I want to do this. And I actually said this in a moment of desperation where I said, look, you got like Godzillas in the streets that are like Square and Stripe that are like flipping the industry upside down. Yes, you might create a monster out of us, but at least we'll be your monster because you got nothing in this fight. And finally, something clicked. They said yes. This is 2017.
Okay.
And
so
I had
a Canadian bank that you're working with?
This was an American bank.
American bank.
So and the U.S. The thing with the Canadian banks is that they're still so closed.
Interesting.
In terms of trying to let competition in. So we got an American one to say yes. And then I went, okay, I've built this business, the original kind of Helcim, right? It was bootstrapped and we had 30 employees and we were making about $5 million a year. So it was like a good business I was proud of, but I was like, this is nothing compared to what I want to build. So I took every single dollar I could out of that business. I hired 15 developers out of SAIT, like junior guys.
Okay.
And we just rolled up our sleeves and we just started coding. We're like, we're going to build our own FinTech and our own payments company. And we're like, oh, it's going to take 12, maybe 18 months of like stealth mode, essentially, right? 3 years later, because it turns out that building an entire payments company from scratch is a whole lot of work. Right at the beginning of the pandemic in 2020, we relaunched, and that's the Helcim today. So that's the very long story.
Wow. Okay. So a few iterations. Sounds like reverse engineering was a pretty common trend in the banking industry because you were talking about Visa and MasterCard reverse engineering. How do you make this stuff legal for themselves to profit? And then it sounds like you were a point of sales reseller, and then you basically saw all of the pain points there and then recreated your own several years later. That's awesome. What's something that you had learned the hard way as a founder, something that maybe nobody warned you about until you were already in it?
Oh, there's a lot of lessons there. One will be about, I think, putting the right team together.
Okay.
So I'm a believer that, and don't take this the wrong way. So let me to our listeners, only about 5% of people can truly like work for a startup, and it's not because they're not brilliant or driven or smart. It's more that you need to be wired a little bit differently in terms of your risk forwardness, like your adaptiveness, your ability to like take in a little pain. And the reality of like when you're building a startup, it's a knife fight. Like it's a weird description, but you are competing against giants that have way more resources than you, way more customers than you, way more market share. And the only thing that you have is like grit, speed, and maybe a different vision and a willingness to like get in that fight. and not everybody wants that. And that's totally normal. And I think that you have to create an environment that is like, able to let those people flourish and reward them for it and be generous with them. But ultimately, you have to make sure that you have the right people. So that's probably one of the biggest lessons when people are starting to do hiring at our company. So we're about 160 people now. And so when managers are hiring for new people, one of the first things we train them is you have to, before you figure out, is this person right for the job and right for the culture and right for all the things that you need, figure out if they're right for a startup. And there's different ways to go about that, but it's a lot about asking about a lot of questions about their past, from what experiences, what challenges have you overcome, and what do you want out of your career? So that would be probably one of the biggest takeaways.
Was this a part of why you had that iteration of your Helcim culture deck?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things like we have. So the Helcim culture book, which is
beautifully done, by the way.
Thank you. I take some credit for the writing, but not for the beautiful designs. The visuals are all the talented team. Specifically for that one, Danny, which is our illustrator at Helcim.
It's so good.
It's for those I want to see. It's helcim.com/theway, and it's our culture book. Yeah, we've iterated through it all as we learned lessons. One of the more recent iteration would talk about it during interviews, but we hadn't really codified it. And what is really important to us is to be super transparent about who we are as a business and like what our flavor of ice cream is, so that before you even apply for the job or dive into what that business is.
So what's your flavor of ice cream?
I think we're like a peach mango, probably based on our brand colors.
Okay.
Just
peach
like
mango, little sherbet.
Yeah,
okay.
we're not durian, that's for sure.
Okay.
So like one of the things that we recently introduced that wasn't codified is the spirit of 50. And essentially, when it comes to like having to work long hours and the amount of energy, yes, you want to do smart work, but there's still just a sheer amount of like effort you have to put into it. I believe in the spectrum. So we are not the company that's 80 hours a week, burnout on your desk, Amazon style. We don't feel like that leads to way too much burnout and like diminishing returns, like kind of like a net negative, right? People don't want to work for companies like that for that long. But the reality, and we're pretty honest about this with anybody that we're interviewing, is we're not like a 35-hour-a-week lifestyle company. No. We're never going to be able to win and build the size of a business that we want doing that.
You're still in the weeds.
Exactly, right? We're pretty honest about it's the spirit of 50, which means like you oscillate, and that's why it's the spirit. It's not like we're measuring 50 hours a week. There's oscillation, and sometimes you have to give more. Sometimes you have to crunch through weekends. And then when you see your teammates have been going at it pretty hard, then it's okay. We encourage our managers, give them some days off. Let's pull them back. But ultimately, it's kind of like the baseline is like the spirit of 50. So that's an example of learning those lessons and attracting the right people. And it's not that some people that are really much more focused on, say, quote unquote lifestyle, they might just be at that point in their lives, or for whatever reason, that's what they need right now. That's totally fine. And there's no judgment there. But then you still have to be honest with yourself as an entrepreneur, being like, what do I need for this business to be successful? And then just be upfront about it.
Fair. So what's your view on organizations that have been interviewing go between team members are seen as family or as team members? So it's Patty McCord.
Yep.
Okay. So we really drilled into her works through Netflix and stuff like that. And she looks at an organization like a team. So you serve a purpose, and up until you serve that purpose, you get compensated fairly and all that. And once you hit essentially a goal or you can no longer adapt, you're removed. And then you also have, maybe not fair to say, but the lifestyle businesses are more of a family. Like, we'll adapt the organization to keep you as a person. And there's not a right or wrong, but where do you sit in your views of?
Yeah, there's definitely not a right or wrong. It's really about the type of organization and a type of like scale of success you're also looking for. I think for us, it's definitely the sports team analogy. We actually use that as part of our performance management. That doesn't mean that we can't create psychological safety, but there's a difference between psychological safety and comfort. And people mix the two together. So psychological safety is knowing that you can raise your hand, you can push back, you can argue, you can say your opinion and drive an impact and not fear retribution. Okay. That's really important. But psychological safety doesn't mean comfortable.
Or complacent.
Complacent. So ultimately, like, you want to create a place that is like performant. And one part I really like about the Netflix, I think it's No Rules, is about their concept of talent density. And that's, you hear like A players want to work with A players, but it's ultimately about, there's been research on this, and they cite it in the book, about even just a few low performers on the team will actually drag down the average by quite a bit. And so you need to have talent density, you need to have drive and tempo and a high level of expectations for everyone, including yourself, of what that means. But you can still do that in a psychologically safe environment.
How do you create a psychologically safe environment?
Transparency.
Okay.
So a ton of transparency. So for example, with us, we do open book management. So all of our financials for our entire company are available on our intranet. We educate our team on it.
Salaries?
Salaries is the one thing that individual salaries is the one thing that we don't show, but what we do show is we have full salary ranges for all the positions and all levels.
There was an organization that basically put their metrics of what everybody was earning so that you could see it. Very transparent. I don't know if I could handle that, but
so we have full open book management, full financials are open, full salary ranges. Just people don't know necessarily like where they are, where others are compared to themselves on that range. That's between them and their managers, but full salary ranges. So transparency is a huge part of creating psychological safety. People shy away from open book management. It's more common in tech companies, less common in like more like small businesses and other types of companies. I think that there's a couple things. People go, oh, what if your business is not doing as well? Won't people freak out? And I'm like, if your business is not doing as well, people are freaking out already. So at least you can be honest about this, how much cash runway we have, and this is where we're going, and this is the plan, and then let them decide like what's best for them, and you'll get your true believers in those scenarios.
Yeah, I'm sure you get people that hunker down because they believe in the mission, or you see the people that don't believe in your capability to dig yourself out of it, and they let themselves go, the silent exit.
Exactly, right? So transparency is a big part of psychological safety, creating trust. And we tell people, when we say trust, we don't mean undying loyalty, drinking the Kool-Aid. That's not
the Yellowstone brand.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's not that. It's more about, in order for people to do their best work, they need to feel trusted. So we give them a whole lot of trust. Open book management is part of that. The transparent culture is part of that. The amount of responsibility and access we give them, they need to really feel trusted. And then in exchange is what we say is not even if you make a mistake, when you make a mistake, because we want to encourage people to take risks. Trust us that we will help you through it. So the one type of behavior we have little kind of patience for is blame, deflect, hide, that kind of lack of ownership. But these are all the parts that you keep working on and then try to live through those examples on how to creating psychological safety. It's not just one thing. It's just like a bunch of elements and pillars that ultimately make people go, okay, no, like I have a trust in the overall system. Even we do something called, we do town halls every month, and we have a Q&A section, and people can ask anything. And so
in front of their peers.
So they submit the questions, and we don't filter them. We put them all on the board, and we commit to answering everyone. And we have had some freaking spicy stuff up there.
I imagine.
But the fact that the company sees me in the hot seat and says I'm willing to be challenged, and I'm willing to like answer it and not delete it, and I think is another part of, okay, if the CEO is willing to get grilled once in a while, then it's okay. It's just part of the whole field.
Yeah.
So
I like it. Who or what organizations did you look to model yourselves off of?
There's a few. Netflix is probably the largest influence.
Oh, great.
I think that they have, if you haven't read No Rules, excellent book.
That's Reed Hastings?
Yeah. So that's it. There's a whole lot of influence, and that doesn't mean you agree with every part of it, but that's definitely one that's probably had the biggest one.
Interesting.
They're just very like raw, open, and candid, and that's, it seems like it could be a good place to work.
Yeah. I had a pretty deep love for them during my time at Adabotics. So I personally got our chief people and culture officer in contact with Patty McCord.
That's cool.
And I hunted her down and got her on the phone. It was great. I loved her book too. I'll have to put it in the show notes when it comes to me, but she had a great book herself. And
I don't think I've read hers, so I should read it.
Yeah. She eventually got let go from her role as well.
Interesting.
And she basically talked about how she had planned obsolescence in the end because she designed out the role to be as a team member, and if she didn't serve her purpose, she was to be basically moved on. And like there was once again that transparency, so she knew what she had to hit, so she wasn't remorseful. I'm sure she had a pretty big payout too. So
she probably did fine. Yeah.
So no tears for her. But what are the most underrated traits you've seen in people who succeed inside of Helcim?
I think, okay, this is going to sound a little cliche, so I'll add a little detail to it, but the ability to do something, to take something from 0 to 1. I'll give you an example. When we first built our marketing organization a few years back, we made the mistake of over specializing too quickly. So then like you had a stellar and a really strong team, but each person only had a certain key piece, right? So you had these like really strong copywriter and then a really strong designer and a really strong SEO person, and a really strong digital ads, but they weren't able to function, get something 0 to 1 all the way through without each other. And what you realize, like when you, as a startup or a scale up or what you want to call it, but like when you're still early in that growth journey, you need people that are able to really go from 0 to 1 on their own, go from idea to a first level of execution or a draft all the way through.
A jagged, rough one, but they got there.
Exactly, right? You don't want people that are sitting there going, oh, like I had this idea for an ad.
I have to wait on so-and-so to
I,
get back from vacation.
This person's going to do this and this person's going to do that and so on. And it's not that matrix of teams are a bad thing, but if they're introduced too early in our organizations, you just create these big business bottlenecks way too early. So to get more specific, I love somebody that is willing to try designing something on their own. And we think we have a beautiful design aesthetic. Our head of design, Rodolfo, is like an amazing talent, and he brings in amazing talent into his team. And we set a really high bar, so don't get me wrong. But I think that you see, for example, people are just like, okay, and then I'll throw this a design to do this part and this and that. And it's just try it. Even if it's not the final version, like just try drawing something, try putting your idea to paper, like try going closer to that finish line. I think underrated. And I think especially as an entrepreneur, I think that's what you have to do. See, for yourself, for your podcast, like everything you do, you're like, there's nobody else to do it. I got to do it. But that's such an amazing skill set that I think is underappreciated.
I've always clung to that saying, the jack of all trades, the master of none, until it only got further strengthened for me when I found out the entire part of the quote. So it's the jack of all trades is the master of none, but often better than the master of one. And
interesting. That's even better.
Yeah.
I never heard that.
So that whole, I might not be a master of a particular domain, but my collection of eclectic skills, it makes me like a good fit for a lot of places.
100%.
So that multi-hats is probably why I love startups so much. Plus, I probably like to run my stress hormones a little too hard from time to time. But yeah, I like that. And I think the ability to try or trial something is made a lot easier now with AI too.
That's what's interesting about AI, is that I think it's really changing all the dynamics. So what it used to be is that if you're a small business startup, starting something in your own organization, it's all about that master of none, but that generalist. That's that generalist superpower. And all of a sudden, what happens with big businesses as they scale is that everybody starts specializing. It makes sense. It's how you start having more leverage, more depth, more quality, more of that like nth degree, right? Is that you see this super specialization, right? They can become really good at that, but then those businesses start suffering from a lack of generalists again. Yeah. So it's a catch-22. What's happening with AI is I think that the system is starting to lean more towards rewarding the generalists.
Okay.
Because the AI can be the specialist. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, wow, that's what I think. If you think about what's happening with coding, with product management, I think over time, it's not like you don't need great software developers, you do, but it's the ones that are like, that have better soft skills, that think about the customer more, that think about the whole system more, that think about those are the ones that I think ultimately are going to thrive more, because they're going to be able to do more. And the AIs are going to be the true specialists in the end. I don't think we'll ever be able to outcompete. Look at what's happened in the past 2.5 years.
Yeah.
Where's it going to be 8 years from now? Not
Progression.
30 years, like 8 years. They're just going to be the specialists and we're going to be the generalists, and we better continue to be really good at cultivating generalists everywhere.
You made an article on your LinkedIn about where Canada could potentially be by 2050. And one of your predictions was an AI powerhouse. For those that don't know, Canada is already an AI powerhouse. So maybe go into that a little bit. Like, where do you see Canada? Why did you feel the need to share these predictions? And what are you hoping for the most out of those 4 outcomes?
The thing with Canada is that we have so many things going for us. And I think the only thing that's in our way is our ambition. I really think so. We can be quick to point to the US and say, oh, look, they have more capital or they have more of this. But in comparison to what? To us, sure, maybe the numbers are larger, but what about us compared to the rest of the world? We are so privileged and we have so much going for us. I remember reading something recently about the average American is a myth. We talk about, well, what's our, say even like our salaries, including mine, compared to CEOs in the States, or like we're quick to compare and say, oh, look, they make more money there. But that's based on the average, and the average American doesn't actually exist. So because you have massive concentration of wealth at the top, more than Canada. Like Canada still has a problem, but nothing near compared to the States. And then you have actually this huge amount of the population that is under
paycheck.
Yeah, paycheck, underrepresented, underskilled. So when they think about the average American, it doesn't exist. It's either the super privileged few at an nth degree, or like this mass of people that optimally need like more opportunity. Canada doesn't have as much of that problem. So when we talk about the average and the median actually look really similar in Canada. In the US, they don't.
So we actually have a large middle class, I guess you could say.
Exactly. Now, going back to your question about AI superpower and just tech superpower and in general, it's like we have some of the highest STEM concentrations in the world. And we have this super educated population. We have a huge amount of capital. Even if we say the States has more capital to invest, so it's like we still have a massive amount of capital, a massive amount of wealth. So you have a population, you still have a good amount of young people that want to make careers. We have natural resources. We have energy, literally like energy both in the ground and opportunity for alternative energies and green energies. Like we just have it all. If you were to design like the only thing I would change about Canada is, and forget the housing shortages right now, I would double the population if you could. I think that's the one piece of the ingredient that Canada's missing. We need to be like 60, 80 million people. Then
is that for like economies of scale and just improved infrastructure and all that kind of stuff?
Exactly. I think it would force us to improve our infrastructure and the connectivity of our cities. And I think that you start hitting economies of scale where your own domestic industries can like thrive quite a bit with that level of size. Look at the Germany's a powerhouse, France is a powerhouse. It's all in that kind of 60, 80 million, right? So I think there's a magic number there that we should aim to reach.
That's interesting. That's a hot take. I like that.
We just need to obviously build the housing infrastructure to support that.
Of course.
But again, it's not like we don't have the resources. It's not like we don't have the land. We're here on the 30th floor in a skyscraper in Calgary, and there's nothing but land. There's all this space. Like even compared, at least Toronto has got, it has hit a lake, and Vancouver hits a mountain range. We got space here. That's not the problem.
Okay.
We got trees, we got space. We just need to.
Okay. So what industry do you selfishly kind of hope pops off by 2050?
I'm super biased. Tech. It's tech. I mean, I'll put AI as part of that, but I think that with the access to talent that we have, the cheap energy that we have, just and the drive that I think this country, I think we undersell ourselves is there, right? I think Shopify is obviously a powerhouse. I'd love for Helcim to be a similar size powerhouse in the Western Canada, and people think of us as like this anchor tenant in the Western Canadian space. But I think there's room for way more.
Of course.
And I love the idea. I know I put it in the article. I love the idea of this built in Canada brand that stands for like stability and trust. And like everywhere in the world where you go, oh, it's built in Canada, there's a trustworthiness to it. And that can be not just physical goods or raw resources, but like software, technology, and be like, oh, okay, it's Canadian built. It just kind of like how like a German car, you're just like, okay, I know there's a baseline of trust.
I'm going to pay for it, but I know that it's going to run forever.
Yeah, I want that for Canadian tech.
So a big thing, so you're talking, in that article, you were talking about how we score very high on enjoyment of life and stuff like that. One of the things too, within those studies, if you look at kind of the negatives of Canada, is our amount of innovation per capita. We don't actually innovate as nearly as much as our neighbors to the south. So how do we start encouraging more of those small, medium businesses that you serve to start, I guess, kicking off, going after it?
Yeah, I think that there's quite a lot of innovation that comes out of Canada, just doesn't get a chance to flourish enough.
Okay.
Or that
Do
capital.
you think it migrates before?
It does. Yeah, I think that's a big AI to your earlier comment. Like whether that's Amy in Edmonton and some of this, like these AI breakthroughs, including neural nets, came out of Toronto, right?
Yeah.
Or came out of Edmonton, or like, I think the innovation, I think the people, like the one human, the small team of humans, like coming up with that haha moment, I think there's probably more than enough of that happening here.
Okay.
But it's about creating a system that allows for it to take root and continue to stay here. That's more investment in capital into it. Us being more comfortable with risk taking and failure. I think that's part of the US culture, for better or for worse, is definitely more like
the pursuit of the American dream kind of thing.
I would say it's more around the failures. Risk and failure are very much accepted. I think that even in decision making, where we typically, like, we service both countries, we typically find, until actually recently, and I think the mood has shifted, which is really nice to see. I think Americans were quicker to say yes to like trying a new service provider, as opposed to like Canadians. I find myself in that bucket sometimes, where it's like we can be more risk adverse to trying something outside of our comfort zone, and I'm even guilty of that. I think the wake up call of what's just happened has made people go, you know what? A risk on another Canadian company is worth the risk. And I don't think that I'm going to get, I think that I'm going to be celebrated with my community, even if it turned out to be a mistake, that I took a risk on a Canadian company. And if that patriotism is what needed us to be a little bit more risk forward, hell, I'll take it. I think we're all better for it.
So you brought up the ability to handle failure is a little more common in the US and stuff like that. Before we got on the mic here, I was talking to you about an event hosted here in Calgary called Fuck Up Nights. It's a global organization, but we have our own hosting here in Calgary. And kind of the topic is around failures and celebrating failures. So what's a failure that, I guess, sticks with you to this day and maybe learned or became a lesson for you?
There's a few.
There's
a few of them. One of them is, it's a failure to turn to a success, but one of my very early clients, when we're knocking on doors selling these machines, was a local chain called Kinjo Sushi. And I met with Peter Kinjo, and I was very young, 25 years old, and I said, hey, I need somebody to give me a chance on trying my machines, and I'm reselling from the bank, right? And he was very straightforward with me. He said, your machines are probably going to suck. They're probably going to be worse than the bank he's with right now, but I'll make you a deal. Every time it breaks, you better be here without complaining and keep my staff happy. And as long as you never complain and you like show up fast and fix it, then I'll stick with you. And like, whether, these machines were breaking like every day, like just every day, it would like, a bug would happen and would wipe all tips. This is back in the day where you have to manually adjust tips and enter the tips and everything like that. So I spent half a year going there almost every day and like manually punching in tips to all the machines. Yeah. And then like profusely apologizing to the staff. After a while, they stopped getting mad at me because at least I would come in and fix it all. But it got to a point where, and then I finally, because they weren't our machines, that time we were reselling, so it wasn't our hardware like today it is, convincing the bank to fix their bugs. And it was quite a tough one. But what I learned from that, so that was definitely like, in the moment I was like, I am fucking up my life. I am fucking up. Like, I should be trying to sell more customers. Now I'm stuck with this one that like, I feel like I need to honor that risk that he took with me. But I think hindsight, I think that was a massive lesson in what the company I built today and the brand I built today, which is really around, like, one of our mottos is choosing the harder path, and our mission is to be the most loved payments company. And it's, if somebody's put that trust in you, you better go all the way. Okay. And if you can't, then be honest and be like, I'm trying my best, but I can't, and I'm give you a month to find a new provider or whatever is the case. Like, really honoring that trust that someone puts in you and sticking through it, I think was probably like a really important business lesson as I learned as a young professional, that even if it was a fuck up. Okay.
Have you broken up with customers before?
Oh yeah, we have. I mean, this is actually part of even establishing a good culture within your team. Like, we deal with tens of thousands of small businesses now across Canada and the US. We have a whole customer service team, and customer service can be a rough go at it. Not everybody is. Most of the time, people are actually really nice and courteous and patient. Yeah. But you always have that small percentage that are just like assholes. And it could be your mistake, it could be their mistake, but they are just treating you.
They're just passionate.
No, they're just assholes. And their grandparents or their parents didn't, give them the right raising. Once in a while, we have a customer that is truly like we tried solving their issue or whatever is the case. They're like rude or like just completely inappropriate with our customers. We typically go through a process where the manager goes, okay, we've resolved this issue, but like moving forward, we can't have this kind of interaction. And then we get the occasional customer just F you and just never, and like I've done more than once where I've said, hey, obviously we don't have value lines here. Obviously we're not the right provider for you. You've got 2 weeks. Thank you very much. And it's important because it's obviously an extreme.
Of course.
But
last case scenario.
Exactly right. And if you have to do that with one out of 5,000 customers, but what it does, the power of that is when customers go, the customer is always right. I know it comes from a good place, but it also sets up this framework of it's okay to abuse your staff.
Yeah.
And ultimately, if your team thinks no matter how much they can just be abused in that way, then they're not going to pour themselves. They're going to create a wall. They're going to create a shield. And they're not going to pour themselves into a relationship with the other 4,999 customers. They could create a much more experience. So it's important for us to, in creating a psychological safety, go, no, in those extreme scenarios, we've got your back. And we will choose you over the customer. And ultimately, it allows that team to bring their best and then create much better relationships with the rest of the customers.
Psychological security. I like that. I like that a lot. So startup culture loves to glorify failure, at least in my opinion. But what's your honest relationship with it now? Is it useful? Is it overhyped? Where are you standing on this?
It's tough. It's always shiny on the outside. And even people look at Helcim's success and we've had a lot of success. We've had a lot of growth, but it's also every day is a freaking roller coaster. And every day to this day, you feel like a hero in the morning and then something happens and you feel like the biggest loser. And you're just like, oh my God, I'm sick. I'm failing at this. I think celebrating failure is important from an standpoint with professionals, with other founders, with other business owners, because it feels very lonely. Yeah. I like to describe it as, I think tech is especially bad. If you think about, say you want to start a tech business and you look at like websites like TechCrunch and FinTech.ca and BetaKit and so on, all you see is mostly success, fancy offices, big funding round. And I compare it to this is aging me, growing up in magazines, right? Okay. And it's like beautiful people. And you're like, okay, that's what beauty is. But it's actually like an extremely unhealthy standard of it. And I actually think tech is guilty of that, where we create this like totally unrealistic beauty standard of what like success is. And then if you're like starting your own startup or small business, whatever, you're like, I suck. Like, I'm not that. This is awful. And so that's unhealthy in the first place. Yep. But I think that by events like Fuck Up Nights or even people that are willing to be candid, hopefully like I am on this podcast, it allows other people to be like, okay, you know what? It's not just a straight journey to the top. It's a whole lot of pits in your stomach and failures along the way, and it's okay.
So what was your biggest zag then?
I mean, recently what I've been trying to tell myself is, I'm going to butcher this saying, but essentially it's like you can't drive forward while looking in the back view mirror. I think I used to, and I'm still guilty of it, but like really beat up myself about mistakes that took too long, lessons I didn't learn fast enough. And then you look up, we compete with some really Square, Stripe and so on, or like big brands. Like we service different markets and we're making our own impact on our own. Like you look at that and you're like, oh man, it's funny. People look up to us and like, oh wow, you're a big success. And then I look up to the next one. I'm like, oh, we're tiny in comparison.
Comparison is the thief of joy.
100%. And I'm trying to do, I just did it, but I'm trying to do less of that. And instead being like, I'm really enjoying what we're building, doing it our unique way and the relationships that I'm building with my customers and the impacts that we have, and just keep leaning into that and be the best version of that as opposed to being anything else. I'll try to keep repeating myself. I listen to that 25% of the time.
That's good. What's something about being a founder that people romanticize, but in reality is much tougher?
I think it's probably on the venture capital side.
Okay.
I think that you see the big numbers, Helcim has raised almost $50 million and that's big, but then compared to other businesses, it's tiny. But like in general, people romanticize that money. It doesn't go to your bank account.
No.
It goes to the business's bank account, and the business becomes very good at spending it.
Yep.
I think that they romanticize. I didn't do the venture capital route until we raised money for the very first time as a Series A company in 22. So all the way to this point was bootstrapped.
Jeez.
And I really valued that. I think it taught us a whole lot of lessons about like how to manage a business smartly. Ultimately, we got to a point where it's like, if we're going to go hit the scales, we need deeper pockets. But I think that people really look up to, and I was guilty of that too. I look up to, oh my God, companies that have raised money and that capital and everything like that. It's just, here's a fun quote, which is, everybody's got a budget problem. It's just about how many zeros. So if you're stressed about buying 3 laptops, I guarantee you somebody at IBM is stressed about buying 70,000 laptops. So like, it's all the same thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, the venture capital allows you, when it's the right moment, allows you to potentially leaning more heavily, but it doesn't fundamentally change the way that you operate your business day to day, and doesn't make you better or worse of a business. So you can become just as good of a professional doing a bootstrap. You're not a better entrepreneur because you raise venture. It'll teach you a lot, but it doesn't mean that like you're a better business for it.
There was that whole period during COVID made famous by SoftBank of exponential growth and basically procuring a war chest to be able to take out your competition with no clear definition to how you're going to create revenue. But the idea was you just dominate the war field, that you're set too big to fail. And then that was quickly disrupted with WeWork basically trying to IPO, and then the fall of that. So having that path to revenue clearly defined by bootstrapping for 14 years, 16 years, depending on how you're looking at it, I could see that making you a really desirable place to put VC money when you go out for it.
I think it's being ready for it. So I think people ask me, should I raise? And it's really when you are at the point where it's either you're doing something that is technically very demanding and challenging, especially if you're thinking about like nowadays biotech or tech or things that's like, you're just going to need like crazy deep pockets to do that research. You can't do it on your own. Or you hit a point where you have this repeatable process where it's, I know what 3 sales reps will do. I think I can replicate it to 50. And when certain things require more upfront capital, though, sometimes it can be done by debt. Sometimes you can finance it through the cash of the operations. I think with a lot of SaaS and FinTech, you're only making, the revenue comes in not as one sum, not like the old days of Microsoft where you buy your license and you pay $300 and they got all that cash. Now it's like you're paying $30 a month. So that puts those businesses in places where like they're ready for that repeatable growth, but they don't necessarily have their own cash enough to do it. And that's where the venture comes in. But in general, you're either doing something really hard technically and you need the capital to do that, or you're at the point where you're ready to really show that repeatability. But be ready, because once you're on that treadmill of venture capital, like you got to deliver results and you're not coming off that treadmill. So wait as long as you can until that moment where like you really feel like, whether you're taking it from debt or from anything, $1 and we'll give you $2 out in a repeatable way.
Okay. So at the very beginning, we were asking you about mentorship and stuff like that. Are you at that stage now where you're doing a little mentoring with other people in the tech community? It's a general question to lead into the next one, but
yeah, I think I want to be careful saying mentor. Mentoring, people can attach themselves pretty big to that term. It's like, you are my mentor. And I think that I'm always happy to give advice to other local founders. I invite them for lunch. I meet with a lot of founders and share tidbits. Whether I'm a mentor in that kind of traditional sense, probably not. I am, by the time this podcast comes out, it'll probably be live. So I'll put a quick plug in there. I'm launching a newsletter on Substack called Build with Heart. And it's a weekly distribution. We're doing some videos with it too. And it's just like lessons along the way. So hopefully that can be like a one-to-many mentorship to give some advice.
So what's some lessons that you find yourself sharing most often?
I think a big one is about building culture. I think we're super proud of the culture we built, the culture book, the way that we lean into transparency. Like, I think we do stand out compared to a lot of businesses in that. Yeah. So I think people ask me for a lot of advice on how to do so. That's when I feel less imposter syndrome in sharing. I think there's lots of things to share there.
Okay. So going back to the VC funding and long-term thinking, when you think about building for longevity, what trade-offs have you had to make, and was it worth it?
Yeah, I mean, that kind of leans into like the harder path. I think that trust is hard to earn, continuously tested, and easy to lose. And when it comes to how you treat your customers, how you price yourself, how you deal with contracts and renewal and all that stuff, you really want to think about the long term, because it's easy to do something that maybe goes against your values but gets you that next quarter milestone or revenue or whatever is the case. But what did you burn along the way in terms of the relationships to achieve that? What does it mean for the long term of what you're building? And also, what message are you sending to your team? Because then you're saying, if Nick is willing to cut corners and make that happen and burn some trust with customers, then maybe long term isn't really the focus anymore. And then are they going to be making long term decisions about the architecture or the product? Or so you have to be careful of what message it, like the second degree effects that a decision like that will have.
I like that a lot. How do you weigh values like transparency, affordability, and trust against speed, scale, and outside capital?
That's a great question. Nothing is black and white. I do think that, you have that project management. It's like you can have speed, you can have quality, and you can have scope, but you can't have all three kind of thing, right?
Yeah, three legs of the stool, yeah.
So I think there's always trade-offs. It's difficult because sometimes we get that with our engineering or designers sometimes, where they're like, we could make it this good and this complex, but it's going to take X amount of time, right? And I think that's where we try to find the compromise is around scope, which is, can we break it? So we don't want to compromise on the quality. Speed is crucial. That's the one thing that we have against our competitors, that like I don't have the deep pockets of Moneris, but I do have speed.
Yeah.
And at the second you give that up, you're giving away your one card, right? So then where the compromise comes in is scope. And goes, can we make it smaller? Can we break it up? Can we start smaller and work our way there so that we can bring some benefits to ourselves and our customers faster? That's usually what we do. I think we all fetishize Apple in a way. Like, it's just like quality above all. And there's some really good lessons in there about the quality experience that you bring to your customers. But Apple, I think the myth of Apple brings into this like totally unhealthy dimension of it's not true to the reality anymore. Yeah. If you look at, I don't know if last time you looked at like an iPhone 3 and iPhone 4, like it was not great. No. There's a whole lot of compromises, and Apple makes compromises all the time.
I don't think that they're drastically iterating either anymore. When you look at the model between iPhone 11 to where are we at now, iPhone 15, like how, other than the operating systems and the camera improvement, I don't think much has drastically changed. Like the initial iPhone versus where we're at now, less of a leap than I think.
I think there's something super powerful in terms of like early 2000s Steve Jobs, where it was about quality and experience can actually be, it's something that really wasn't part of the conversation in technology, and he made it part of that. And I think you see it in more modern businesses like Airbnb, where the founder is a designer and the experience is a big part of how they win. So I think those are amazing lessons, but taking anything to an extreme is just, it's idealistic, but not actually realistic.
Still big fan of Tim Cook, not Tim Cook, but
I'm sure there's somebody that calls it Team Cook. So.
Yeah, Team Cook. But so you've got a growing team, a growing company, a family. How do you stay grounded and show up in both roles?
I don't. No, I try.
But that's the reality that people need to understand.
So there's this concept, we'll maybe link it in the show. It's the 4-burner concept. And essentially, it's like, imagine you got a gas stove with 4 burners on top, right? One of them is family, one of them is health, one of them is friends, and one of them is career. And if you want to be good at something, you got to turn off one. If you got to be great at something, you got to turn off 2. That's a really pit in your stomach kind of concept. What I like to think about is maybe it's a little bit more gradual. It's not on off. For me, I'm a new dad, and that's really woken me up to like, I want to be the best father that I can. I want to be present for dinners. I want to be there in this little kiddo's life. And so how do I change my oven or my stove dials to make that work? And like, my workouts have suffered, and me hanging out with friends is a very far and few things in between, which is unfortunate. And it's not that it's not important, but these are the decisions I'm making for ultimately what I want to accomplish in my life. So it's like the family burner and the business burner are all the way up, and the other ones are just like simmers. And hopefully I'll be able to switch those down the road, that delayed gratification. I don't think there's like a good or a bad answer. It's just being super honest with yourself about you cannot do it all. I think it's Scott Galloway that talks about you can have it all, you just can't have it all at once. So it's choose now, and you can change it after. And hopefully I'm in the spot where later in my career, I'll be in a financial position where I can go, hey, I can lean more on other things. But it doesn't mean that's the right choice. It's just my choice.
That discussion point of life, what is it? Work-life balance. And Jeff Bezos put it as work-life blend. And it is, as he said, it changes with the seasons. You have to turn on one, turn off another, and your burner analogy. So I think more people need to know about that kind of stuff. There is very much a burnout culture in startups because everybody's trying to do everything. They're trying to be the best partner, father, fitness athletes, best investment for their VC, the best leader for their team, and it's hard to be it all at once.
I think that goes to like unrealistic lifestyle and expectations, right? Like back to that magazine where, well, you see somebody on Instagram and they're the best. They're ultra marathon runner and super successful influencer and business this and great father, whatever. And you're like, you don't know what's going on. And maybe they're terrible at something, and or the sacrifices the compromises they had to make. So I think if you set yourself, I think we should all be ambitious. It's a good thing, but realize that odds are they've had to make compromises too, and don't set yourself that impossible bar. You're just going to fail at everything. Instead, choose the 2 or 3 things that like are most meaningful to you right now. And it's not a judgment on anybody else, not a judgment on yourself. What are the most important things to you right now? And that can change, and pour yourself into those and be okay that there's less on the others.
When all is said and done, what do you want your personal legacy to be? Not just Helcim's, but Nick's.
I think so. The newsletter launching called it Build with Heart. And I think it's really around the almost what can seem like a contrarian of you can build something really successful, but not losing your heart in the process. I think that I don't always live up to that ideal, but I certainly try to push myself towards that and trying to create a culture of that. And hopefully if I can influence others to thrive for that, I think it's something that I'd be pretty proud to be remembered by.
I can't wait for that newsletter to come out. I'll be sure to tag it in the show notes. If you could sit down with your younger self, pre-Helcim, maybe just scribbling ideas, what would you tell him?
I think I would tell my younger self to maybe appreciate the person that I already was back then. So I've grown a lot. I think I've smoothed out the edges. I'm definitely a more well-rounded person. But if I look back, I actually think it came full circle in terms of the Nick that I was in my kind of like late teens and early 20s is actually really similar to the person I am today from a business standpoint, from the drive and the things I like, and even silly things like my love of Lego. Like I've rediscovered it, and I'm like, oh yeah, because I love building and the creation process and all the things. And I think I like shied away from certain parts of it because it was like, it's not what the image that I thought a business person would be. And now I've come full circle to be like, I actually that guy quite a bit. And I like the way he built and challenged himself. And I think I've got to discover myself again in that way. Yeah, I think I would tell my younger self, just appreciate the person that you are and don't be afraid to lean into it.
That's beautiful. That was the last question I had for you. So thank you. For those that made it all the way to the end, once again, I thank you so much. You know what to do. Help us get it out there. Share us. We really appreciate all the feedback that we've been getting too. It's really helping the channel grow. Till next time, let's get after it. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thanks for having me, man.